Welcome everyone to the Assembly's work session to deal with our first quarter budget revision proposed amendments. And I'd like to start out by having everyone introduce themselves, and I'll start at this side of the table.
Marilyn Bonsoff, budget.
George Vacalis.
Jennifer Johnson.
L.B. Gray Jackson.
Dick Trainee.
Ernie Hall.
Bill Evans.
Jen Steele.
Amy Demboski.
Pete Peterson.
And folks in the audience, please introduce yourselves.
Dennis Wheeler, Municipal Attorney.
Miranda Wasso, public.
General Day, Private Citizen.
Rachel Rios, budget.
Thank you. Again, welcome to our work session.
Our clerk didn't introduce herself.
Barbara Jones, municipal clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Okay, so the purpose of this meeting, as I think I stated, is to go over the proposed amendments that the Assembly members have brought forward to the Mayor's first quarter budget revision resolution. And I'm going to go one by one. And the amendments that have been submitted so far have been amendments from Mr. Trainee and myself, and then Mr. Honeman. So unless Mr. Trainee wants to do it himself, I'll be happy to
go
go through
ahead.
these proposed amendments, okay?
Bring them forward.
All right, so amendment number one is an amendment submitted by Chairman Trainee and myself, and it's a request. The department is Parks and Recreation, and the amount is for $40,000, and it's to provide funding for installation of a sound system that has been donated, okay, and it's also to provide additional funding for electrical service to a seasoning warming facility pad, electrical upgrades to the existing system with the park to support power needs at various locations as specified by MOA Parks and Recreation, as well as to serve as a match to the Anchorage Park Foundation matching grant that the organization that I'm about to mention has received. One of the annual events that are held at the facility is the Winter Solstice Party held at the Oval. It's the skating oval at the Cuddy Park that we're referring to. And a donor took note of the need for a sound system and for a wide range of activities that happen at the Oval, from holiday music to announcements during walkathons and so forth. And private citizen donated $23,000 worth of sound equipment. Anchorage Skates and Alaska Speed Skating Club, they've received a bid for $15,800 to install the sound system equipment, and the Alaska Speed Skating Club applied for a matching grant from the Park Foundation and was granted a $3,911 grant. Mr. Trainee, you have a comment?
It's Tom McGrath. We all know Tom donated the equipment to the city, and I think it's remarkable when someone will donate that amount of equipment to the city. But we've got to get it installed. It's been there for a while, so it'd be good to get it installed. The nice thing about the park is, much like Central Park in New York, it becomes a focal point for your city. And that's what the Cuddy Park's becoming.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Ms. Johnston?
So, I'm just adding up here. Where do you get to the 40,000? If they received a bid to install it at 15.8.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. But as I mentioned in the description of the amendment in the beginning, that it's to install the sound system, electrical, and also electrical service to a seasoning warming facility pad, electrical upgrades to the existing system to support the power needs. So it's more than just installation of the sound system that was donated. Anything else, Ms. Johnson?
And that's just your general
I'm sorry?
cost. So as far as itemizing the cost of each of those, you're not quite sure yet as far as the others?
No, but we can certainly provide that information for you on Tuesday if you'd like.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, great.
Mr.
So if
Baskin.
somebody can take note that we need to provide that information. Thank you. Mr. Steele?
My point is this
Thank you.
just to run electricity and put a cover and that kind of thing? The equipment's not going to stay there. I presume it's going to be brought in for events.
To tell you the truth, Mr. Steele, I really don't know. Mr. Potter from Dow Engineering approached Mr. Trainee and I because it's our district, and that's why we took the liberty of bringing it forward. And he also said that the mayor wouldn't have any issue with it, and so we brought it forward. But we're going to get additional information from him as requested by Ms. Johnson and have it at the meeting on Tuesday.
If we have that equipment and we just installed the apparatus and maybe a container to put it in, to keep it out of the weather and stuff, then it could be movable from, say, Cuddy Park to maybe the tennis courts at East, or maybe out Goose Lake or any
Right,
number of things.
right.
So
Right.
that makes it more versatile.
Right.
It's a mobile.
Right, thank you, Mr. Steele. In addition, it is a public hearing on Tuesday, so I suspect Mr. Potter will stand up and tell us everything we need to know. Ms. Dombrowski?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think you have addressed what I was going to ask. I'm not familiar with the seasonal warming pad, so I was going to ask for the cost per each project with a little bit more description, but I think you already answered by that. So.
That's a really good idea. Thank you, Ms. Dombrowski. Mr. Trainee?
I think every year too, this oval skating group comes in and gives us a check for about $10,000.
Yeah, they do.
So with this, they'll be able to continue making that donation every year to us. So it's not like it's a group that keeps taking money. They actually bring us money every year.
Thank you for that comment, Mr. Trainee. Any other comments on this amendment? Okay, so we're going to go to amendment number 2.
We need the administration's point of view on this also for the Tuesday meeting, so we hear from administration.
Okay. Mr. Trainee just made a comment, and I'm going to relay what his comment was. And we would like to have a spreadsheet like we've had in the past with the administration's comments on each and every single one of our proposed amendments. Okay, we would appreciate having that. Actually, hopefully before Tuesday.
Actually got it already written down.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Michaelis. Okay, so we're going to go to amendment number 2. And that amendment is also brought forward by Mr. Trainee, myself, and Mr. Honeman is also on this amendment. And the department is community development, and the amount is $30,000. And it is to provide funds to hire an independent consultant to undertake a review of Title 21. The United States Department of Housing and Urban Development filed a complaint against the municipality of Anchorage, alleging that Anchorage Title 21 discriminated against group homes for persons with the particular disability of alcoholism. We've heard about this earlier in the year, if you remember. To resolve the complaint, the municipality of Anchorage and HUD have entered into a conciliation agreement, and the agreement requires that Anchorage hire an independent land use consultant within 60 days to assess how Anchorage's Title 21 complies with federal laws, and you can see the list of federal laws below. Again, that amount is $30,000, and any comments? Okay, no comments. Thank
Why
you.
isn't
Steele
it
had
already
one.
in there?
I'm sorry, Mr. Steele, did you have a comment?
Yeah, why isn't it already in there? Seems to me that if they dictated it, the administration should put it in.
Well, that's a really good point, Mr. Steele, but the good news is we're bringing forward this requirement. Yeah. Mr. Trainee, did you have a comment?
No, just that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Steele. Okay, amendment number 3. It's also being brought forward by myself, Mr. Trainee, and Mr. Honeman. And the department is the mayor's office. And if you remember, the Fairview business community were at our ad hoc committee on alcohol and drug abuse, and they gave a really, really good presentation, and they brought forward a recommendation to help us with the situation, and that's part of the mission of the ad hoc committee, is to find solutions. And so what this amendment does, in the amount of $216,000, it provides for a grant to the Fairview Business Association to organize a work program for chronic inebriates in conjunction with local businesses. The funding will provide for a coordinator to oversee recruitment of businesses to participate in hiring people in socially relevant contexts, whatever that means. The funding will cover startup costs to include office space, rental and equipment, utilities, website development, and other social network activities, outreach materials, and supplies. The startup cost for the initial year is anticipated. This is the startup cost for the initial year, but it's anticipated that it's going to cost $176,000 every year in ongoing costs to maintain the program in future years. Any comments? Ms. Johnston?
So
Thank you.
in the committee, I gather that this was something that was brought to the committee. Was there any further discussion about Rural Cap or other entities, Keela, already doing some of these programs and they're already located in Fairview? I mean, did the committee do a full vetting of this idea?
Do you want me to comment, Mr. Evans?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chris Constance, who works for Aquila House, and I think this proposal was put together by Aquila House, and it was multiple pages. And of course, I just took the first page that had the numbers on it and a short description of the project. And again, it's a public hearing on Tuesday. I'm sure Mr. Constance will be there testifying and will be able to answer any questions that anybody has. And if you want some questions asked and answered before the meeting, please just submit them.
And so, and by having this in the mayor's office, you are having it, suggesting as part of the community grant program?
Right, because the mayor's office handles the community grant program, and that's the reason why I put, because it is a grant, and they're going to have to apply for it in the same way that everybody else who gets a grant from the mayor's office has to apply. So we're just putting the funding there, but they'll still have to apply for it.
Okay.
Mr. Evans?
What would you say is the goal? It's a work program for chronic inebriates. Is it the goal to put money in their pockets? Is it a goal to help, them get over their addiction? I'm just not sure what we're looking to
Well, just
accomplish.
a brief comment, but I'm sure Mr. Constant can answer questions a whole lot better than I can, because this is his proposal. But the way I see it is, it's a public-private partnership. Businesses are going to give folks jobs, just like, Worksession-First is a big initiative in this community, and I support it 100%. But you have a home, and then now you'll have an opportunity to have a job to help pay your way. That's how I see it. Thank you, Mr. Evans.
And just can I quick follow?
Please.
What do we mean by a socially relevant context?
When I read it, I said, whatever that means, because I don't know what it
Okay.
means. And hopefully, and I'll have a conversation with Mr. Constance before Tuesday to make sure that I'm sure he's going to be out there
Gotcha.
and answer any questions that we have. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So for 216,000, how many people are we talking about employing?
One person, as I mentioned, if you look at the description, I think it's pretty clear. It's gonna be one person in an office who is handling the program. And there's a breakdown. We have a spreadsheet with a breakdown, and I'll send that to everybody this weekend. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Peterson, Mr. Trainer.
I think, Mr. Evans, we got a sheet about 3 pages of information from Chris at that meeting. So we'll make sure Chris is ready to testify in front of the assembly on this. Because of all the areas of our town that needs help, Fairview just rings right out there as an area. It's a depressed area in our town. We've got to take care of it and see what we can do to help them. I'm not just saying throw money at it, but let's see what plan they've got and if we can help them make this become a reality.
And one other comment. Chris sent an email to all of us with that information on it, but I'll forward it again to everybody this weekend. Any other comments before we move on? Okay, thank you. So now we're going to go to amendment number 4. And guess who's bringing forward this amendment?
We were busy.
Okay, and this amendment is Department of Health and Human Services. And during the 2015 budget process, the 3 of us brought it forward then, and we weren't successful. And we figured, this is a public safety issue. And all of us get lots of calls and emails from our constituents on public safety issues. And that's one of the reasons why we're bringing this forward again, with the hopes that we'll have the support to approve it. But it's $129,720, and it is to provide funding for a homelessness coordinator. When the mayor was elected in 2009, he noted considerable concern regarding the homeless, and he hired a homeless coordinator to assist in expediting the strategic action plan. This executive position was implemented in 2009 and has been vacant since 2012 when that person went to work for the Assembly. This is a needed position that will function as a senior policy advisor on issues related to homelessness in Anchorage, manage the cold weather plan, temporary sheltering for the homeless, including sheltering with local churches, and collaborating with other community partners in addressing homelessness-related issues, including potential recovery centers for inebriates. Any comments? Mr. Evans?
Because this position was filled for a while, Daryl had that position. Do we have any information about how things were going when we had a homeless coordinator versus the years since that we could use to show that it was of value?
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Mr. Trainer, do you have?
We can get that to you from Daryl. Daryl's got a complete list of what he accomplished while he was homeless coordinator. And the absence of him being there, we can talk to you about that. I'll get Daryl to call you.
Thanks.
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do you think we could get Daryl to maybe train this new person so that we wouldn't have to cover ground that Daryl had already covered and he's doing this? So
I think we can
start
give Daryl the
working
time
on
to
it?
do that, yes.
Okay.
Since he works for us.
Yep.
Right.
And we're not giving him back.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Thank you, Mr. Trainee. And just one comment. For about, I don't know, maybe 2 years now, through the Public Safety Committee, the Department of Health and Human Services give a report every single month at our meetings. And we've been talking about this, and they were supposed to have somebody doing this and didn't think they needed it because they were going to have somebody else do it, and it never happened. And so I think this is really important position that we need in our community to help us dealing with public safety issues, and this is one of them. Mr. Trainee?
I'm thinking of the community council we have, North Star, and they talk about the homeless that are living on the trail there, all the blue tarps that are everywhere as you walk from the garden through that community council. And we need a homeless coordinator to try and deal with that issue. Elvie and I have got the problem of Campbell Creek. We constantly get issues brought up to us by constituents that, oh, there's another homeless camp there. It's all over this town. Unless we start working at it, it's going to keep multiplying.
Ms. Domboski? Thank you, Mr. Trainee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As I'm looking at this, has there been any discussion or consideration, the next administration that comes in may reorganize the senior staff in order to create a position like this with the existing funding that they have? Have we had any discussions about that or thought about? I would hate to see that we add up almost $130,000 if the next mayor comes in with their existing budget and makeup of their staff. They might create that position within the mayor's office.
Thank you, Ms. Domboski. I had a comment. Do you want to go first, or can I go
I'll go first.
Okay, Mr. Trainee.
We haven't decided who the mayor's going to be yet, ma'am.
Right.
On the 5th of May, we'll figure that out.
Yeah.
But we want to give you guys the opportunity, whichever one it is, to have these assets, because you're going to need it to address this issue.
And I just like to say, Mr. Trainee, I'm not being presumptive. I'm just asking if the conversations had been had.
No.
Because, regardless of who it is, there might be already somebody, there might be already discussions about how to do that. And I just didn't know if you guys had had those or not.
We
Thank you,
have them,
Mr.
but from my perspective, I don't think you have the assets right there to do this. And that'll be up to whoever becomes mayor. But it's just, I don't see the assets there, and I want to give whoever the mayor is the opportunity to have the assets to start addressing this issue, because whoever the mayor is has a big job in front of them.
Thank you, Ms. Domboski. Thank you, Mr. Trainee. And Ms. Domboski, a few minutes ago, I mentioned that for the past 2 years, through the Public Safety Committee, we have been asking Health and Human Services about having a homeless coordinator. They've been telling us that, oh yeah, we have somebody who's going to do it, and it never happened, because they don't have anybody to do that job. And that's why, Mr. Trainee, and I brought forward that amendment during the 2015 budget process that obviously didn't pass, and that's why we're bringing it forward again, because they don't have the resources for this position. Thank you, Mr. Domboski. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I noticed the last sentence here, it talks about including potential recovery centers for inebriates. Is that the Schick-Shadle thing that we're talking about in that line right there? Because you got a Schick-Shadle brochure or something the other day that we were supposed to read so that we'd understand what all their plans are. Is that specifically in there for that purpose or not?
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Trainee, you want
From
to
my
address
perspective,
that?
it's not in there for Schick-Shadle. It's in there, the realization that no matter what happens to Schick-Shadle, we're going to have people that are inebriated in this town, and we need a comprehensive plan to dealing with them. I appreciate the mayor wants to fly into Seattle, but that's only a few people. And I think, from the ones I've talked to, they want to see it, that recovery here in Anchorage, where the people live, rather than outside. Do you remember when we used to send prisoners outside the lower 48 to prison, and the problems attendant with that? Now they've been trying to bring the prisoners home. I don't want to send these people outside. I want to try and keep them here, make them part of the community, but not drinking.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Peterson, I'll add to Mr. Trainee's comments. That isn't talking about Schick-Shadle, because Schick-Shadle wasn't even thought of when this description was put together. As a matter of fact, this is the same description of the position when Darrell held it.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Any other comments on this amendment? Okay, thank you. Well, we're going to go to amendment number 5. And can anybody guess who's bringing this forward? Myself, Mr. Trainee, Mr. Holman, once again. Okay, and this is Health and Human Services. And this is an amendment that we brought forward, again, during the 2015 budget process, and it failed, and it is a public safety issue. We have 9 community councils, Mr. Traney and I, and we're getting a lot of calls and emails from folks about dogs on the trails. And it's a pretty dangerous situation that's happening, and I think that it's time for us to bring this forward again with the hopes that we'll get support for it. The amount is $273,980. In 1999, the National Animal Control Association conducted a comprehensive study of the Anchorage Animal Care and Control Center, which highlighted the need for additional officers. Based on the number of requests for service and the coverage area of Girdwood to Chugach, this organization recommended that Anchorage needed 17 additional officers. This amount would increase the amount of the animal control contract in order to add just 3 additional officers. The requested funding includes labor and benefits, training, operational costs, supplies, equipment, vehicle operations, and vehicle purchases where needed. Any comments, Mr. Evans?
It says it recommended having 17 officers, not 17 additional, is that right?
No, 17 additional, based
Okay.
on 300,000 plus
Think you
community.
Probably want to change that because it just says recommended 17 officers.
Okay, so add the word additional. Thank you, Mr. Evans. It's added.
And how many total officers do they have?
I'm not sure, Mr. Fakela, do you know?
I don't know how many contract it has right now.
Okay, we can find out, Mr. Evans. Okay. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I've heard from people in my district too, that they made calls and just seemed like they were so swamped down at Animal Control that they, just didn't get around to get back to them as fast as they had hoped, and so they had to make numerous calls before they got someone out there, So I definitely agree that we probably need additional personnel.
Any other comments? Mr. Michaelis?
Yeah, so really, I think what it is, it's really a staffing issue as far as time, because there's certain times that they have very, very limited staffing. And one of the issues, of course, is Girdwood's quite a ways away. And, by the time they send someone down there to try to deal with an issue, it will take a while to get someone there. And obviously, that's someone that's not here with the bulk of the population is to handle those issues. But, what the right staffing level is, I don't know. I'm very aware of that report that you're talking about, and I don't know if that's right or wrong.
Okay, I appreciate your comments, Mr. Michaelis, but personally, I look at our community and it's not 200,000 anymore. It's 300 plus thousand, and just like we need more police officers, I think that we also need a couple more animal control officers based on what's happening just in our 9 community councils alone. So again, thank you for your comments. Any other comments on this amendment? Okay, thank you. We have one more that was submitted from the same 3 assembly members.
suspects.
The usual suspects, yeah.
And the last of the big time spenders. Go ahead.
Okay.
This one we need.
As opposed to the others we didn't.
No, we need this one
I'm
too.
just checking.
I know, Amy. You're in mayor mode. I understand that.
No.
And let me just make one comment as we go forward. The majority of these amendments are all related to public safety, which is a really important issue within our community, especially right now. Mr. Traney?
We had a meeting yesterday headed by Mr. Hall, and this is one of the items we discussed. As we work towards this marijuana being legal and being for recreational purposes, we've got to get the planning on the deck. So we've got the staff there, because we're going to have to do conditional use permits. We're going to have to figure out a whole host of things we never thought of when people said, yeah, we want to make it legal in this state. But do you want it in your neighborhood, or maybe Eagle River doesn't want it? Maybe we should have it in Girdwood. They may want it there. But we're going to have to figure... Okay, another part of town. Anyway, we've got to have the planning staff to produce this document. Mr. Hall, what was your
excuse
experience with it?
Yes.
I know.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Mr. Evans is actually ahead of me, and I'll follow him.
Right,
In so many ways.
Gentlemen, before we continue this discussion, can I at least read the amendment? Thank you. Okay, it's Community Development Department, and it's $115,880, and it's being brought forward to provide funding for an entry-level planner to assist with the required marijuana land use regulations, another public safety issue. Mr. Hall, I think you have the floor.
Okay.
What we've become very aware of with this committee that I'm chairing is the fact that the legislature has not enacted any legislation at all other than deciding that we will have a marijuana board, which the governor is yet to sign that legislation. And at that point, then they've got to get it appointed, and hopefully then they would begin to draft regulation. But what has not happened in the legislature at all this year is none of the bills have passed in regards to statute. And what we've all been in hopes of is the fact that they would do a good job and get local regulation into statute, or at least give us a basis to work from, like we do with the alcohol control or alcohol licensing. But we're very well aware they have not done anything. I don't think committee meetings are occurring now. It would appear that they have no intention. And the way that the initiative was written is if the state does not do their job, then it defaults to local government to be prepared to handle this come the 24th of February of next year. We've already had the planning department and zoning drafting plans on how we would handle that and work for the implementation of being able to make it happen. It's going to require some zoning regulation statutes that we're going to need to address, whether we're going to do conditional use permits or land use permits. There's just a lot to be decided, and what they presented to us was 3 plans for that particular department, the third one being the realistic plan. And in order to do that, it's going to require a significant amount of work on their part, as well as Mr. Wheeler in the legal department, because as he stated to us yesterday, it becomes particularly difficult when we don't have state statute that we're actually working from and under. So in order to be able to pull this off in a timely fashion, it's going to require some extra duty on their part to be able to get this prepared for us. And even then, it's going to be a real tight shot because we got public hearings that are going to be required as we move along with all of this. So I would absolutely endorse the fact that we need to do this funding so that we can be prepared, because it is the law of the land. And if the state doesn't do anything, then it's going to be our problem to deal with.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Trainee?
And some of our community councils are already taking positions on this. I think Northeast passed a resolution. They don't want any sales in their community council. That's all well and good, but that part of our community councils hasn't divorced itself from the rest of the town. And so we really need to have the help of the planning department to craft this document, because as Ernie says, we're looking at a lot of assembly meetings. Right now we only meet twice a month. We're probably going to have to up it to 3 to deal with the public demand to be heard on this issue as it comes forward to us. And what were they looking at, the 29th of June to have this? They had a date on there. It'd be good to have the document.
Yeah, they're trying to get the document, but at that point in time, then we start all the public process at the public hearings and the time required with all of those.
And that's all it'll be.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Peterson?
Jennifer's.
Mr. Peterson was next. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I was just going to mention that I do believe that part of the reason that some of these bills have not been moving in Juneau was because some of the leadership has decided that it might be better to have Cynthia Franklin and the ABC Board draw up some of these rules and regulations. And that actually, I think, is a wise choice, because she has been on top of it from the beginning and has done her homework and is well prepared to write these regulations. And so I think we're actually going to probably get some regulations sooner than what we might think. But as far as this particular amendment is concerned, hopefully we're hiring this person so that Erica McConnell doesn't have to do everything. She's already, I've been by her office, she's got staffs everywhere. I don't know how she keeps up with what she's supposed to get done already. So I think there's definitely a need to hire someone, because I don't believe that she can spread herself that thin for too much longer.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Evan, and then Ms. Johnson. Well, I am now that you raised your hand, Mr. Steele. Thank you.
I thought you acknowledged me, but that's all right.
You have to take this outside. First of all, I agree with what Ms. Peterson said about Cynthia Franklin handling this. I do have some confidence that she's actually going to do a pretty good job of getting that together. What I don't have, and I apologize for not attending the marijuana meetings, but if the state does come through, or Ms. Franklin, or they do come through with regulations, do we still need this?
What we
yeah.
need to do, if I may, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Evans.
The decision that we made is we need to get this work done, and if they do, then we default to them. But what we know right now with the schedule that we've got, if we wait on them and they don't do anything, we're not going to be prepared.
May I follow up?
Thank you, Mr. Evans.
What happens then, the state does nothing or doesn't complete the process, February 24th, 2016 rolls around. We have nothing in place as far as any type of licensing, conditional use for marijuana facilities. What happens?
That would be an interesting one. I guess Mr. Wheeler would be the one that needs to answer that, but we got a state statute that says it's going to be legal to do commercial marijuana, but coming February 24th.
Mr. Wheeler, would you like to respond?
Through the chair, assembly members, there's an opportunity for the local government to adopt regulations and handle licensing. But it's a pretty short window. I don't have the initiative with me, but I want to say it was 90 days or something, but it's really good.
90 days.
So, in the absence of that, are you saying that it's entirely unregulated? You have no licensing requirements and you have no land use requirements.
So just so I'm clear, as of February 24th, 2016, or whatever the date is, if there's no regulations in place at the state or local level, then people can just open up marijuana grow operations, marijuana commercial cells, and is that what we're looking at?
Through the chair, Mr. Evans, I'll give you a little write-up on that. That may be exactly what happens.
Okay. And
Because the assembly is not opted out.
right, that was actually my next point.
Well, this conversation is happening between Mr. Evans, Mr. Hall, so please feel free to go on. Thank you.
And I think that's just another important point too, that we have the opportunity to put the brakes on the entire process if it looks like the state's not coming through with regulations, we're not fully sure we're ready to go forward. We could always opt out, which would prevent, I would think, any kind of commercial sales in the city, and then opt back in when we were ready. So I don't know that there should be this urgency to have everything ready in place by February 24th. And I'm not saying this is not a good idea. I'm just saying it's not necessarily the only idea.
Yeah. My response to that, Bill, is a significant amount of what they're going to be doing in this process, we're going to need to do, even if the state had everything in place, because we still got to go through and identify the zoning, specific locations, what we're going to allow, what we're not going to allow. So there's a lot of this work that if the state had done everything they needed to do and had it ready, but what they would have gave us was a great starting point that we could take that and either make it more stringent. We can't make it any less stringent, but we've got to go ahead and get our zoning, et cetera. And a big decision made. One of the big conversations going to happen in regards to this is whether we do conditional use or land use. If we do land use, they have the ability to do that over at planning and zoning, and we don't get in it. And quite honestly, when it comes to conditional use, I think in some instances we've succeeded in messing that up pretty bad. So, but it's a discussion we need to have. So they're going to begin to prepare how each one of those will work and what will be an upside or a down for a side for. So there's a significant amount of work we have to do. And the committee honestly just been kind of waiting to give the legislature a chance to give us that base to start from. But at this point, we would move ahead without that.
Just in closing, I would wait and give the state more time to get that based on, because I think if we don't, when we start going on our own, when they finally do come through with regulations and stuff, there'd be a lot of stuff that we did that we wouldn't have had to do, or that would be inconsistent with what they did. I'm not concerned that the February 24th date is some kind of dire deadline because of our ability to opt out whenever we need to, if we feel that we have to bail. So I would just wait a little longer. Still may need this at some point, but I would hold off as long as possible.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wheeler, Mr. Evans, and Mr. Hall. Ms. Johnston is next.
Actually, my question is a global question about all the amendments, but just to follow up on this, there is a land use portion of this no matter what happens. Even opting out, I think you're gonna have to sort of consider the land use. So I don't see this as a total waste, but I'll do mine at the end,
All
because
right.
mine's more global.
Ms. Johnson, thank you, and I agree with you. Mr. Steele is next, Mr. Peterson, Mr. Trainee, and then you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. You absolutely need this, and you're probably going to be needing more than this. You're certainly going to need some staff with the assembly if we're going to be processing like alcohol, conditional use permits, and that type of thing. But you need somebody, certainly at the senior planner level, to work with the ABC board and others to do it. The state was preoccupied, and I think, quite frankly, a bit overwhelmed with what they had to do in that short period of time. And so, being the largest population center, we are going to be impacted, and we need some resources to help the Assembly Committee do this, or it's not going to get done.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Trainee?
Just to opt out's not an option. We tried that with fireworks, and they come in from Big Lake, and believe me, if we opt out, they're just going to come in from the Matsu Valley. We need to have a structure in place that determines where it can be sold and where it can be utilized at. Going back to the animal control, we have 7.5 officers, with one being a supervisor currently. So my wife's on the animal control board, so I simply text her and ask her how many they've got. It's easier that way.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee, Mr. Peterson, and then Mr. Evans.
Okay.
7.5.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
Change.
I'm
But the
not
amount of
really
animals have.
all that worried whether that there's not going to be regulations written before January or February. I expect that midway through this summer that Cynthia Franklin and the ABC board are going to have their first draft of regulations put out to get some comments back on it. And so it's obviously going to be a moving target, so to speak, why all this is up in the air as we make decisions on what some of these rules and regulations are. And I think eventually we're going to end up with, they're going to set it up so if you do have a small grow, that you'll be able to do it in residential neighborhoods. But if you have a large scale commercial operation, that you would have to probably have that in an area that's zoned resident or industrial. So that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson, for your 2 cents. Mr. Evans?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Mr. Trainee?
Just it'll end up being the Marijuana Control Board, as soon as they're appointed, not necessarily the ABC board. Because remember, the governor got that through,
Right.
and as soon as they staff that,
Yeah.
those will be the ones that are telling Cynthia what they want to see happen with it. And I saw an article in the paper yesterday. They had the list of the 15 most influential people on marijuana in the country, and Cynthia's name's on there. So she's getting national prominence.
Okay, any other comments on this, Ms. Johnson?
Oh,
On
no,
this
I-
amendment?
no.
Right. What I'd like to do at this point is, I think, I know that there was an email sent out, and I'm not sure if everybody had an opportunity to read it, but there was a revised tax limit calculation, and it was revised because the original one did not include, which is allowed, the $1 million for the judgment for the dome. So I'm going to give the floor to Marilyn to talk to us about that revision. Marilyn, please. Thank you.
The tax cap that we had included, or the tax cap calculation that we had included in both the presentation of the resolution for the revised budget and the PowerPoint with the slide 10, we had shown a tax cap limit of $251 million $250,313,010. Which, as Madam Chair stated, we did not exclude the $1 million for the dome. So, with the cap being excluding the $1 million for the dome, the cap is now $251,313,010. So, with the revised budget as presented, we would be $4,875,794 under the cap.
Can you repeat that?
800.
$4,075,794.
That doesn't include the school, does it?
It just adds another $1 million under the cap from the previously stated amount.
Mr. Trainee?
Marilyn, does that add the school's money in because we're restricted from what we can give them based on state law once the state sets the foundation formula? Then how much we can give them, is that factored in there too?
Through the chair, Mr. Trainee, it does not. This is only the MOA side of the tax.
How much then could theoretically be freed up under the school district's ASD side?
At this time, through the chair, Mr. Trainee, the available capacity under the school side of the cap is it's over $4 million, and it is actually $4,230,697. But that does not include, that is at the approved budget, but that doesn't include any pending legislation.
Okay.
That there's potential for a reduction in the local match. The number right now is said to be a potential reduction of $2.2 million, so it may increase the capacity to about half of that, which would bring the capacity of the ASD side to be $5.3 million.
Thank you, ma'am.
Any questions to Ms. Banza? Okay, I just have a couple of comments. Okay.
And I had some global questions about the amendments.
Okay, can I make these comments first, if you don't mind, because I think they're relevant before you make the comments? Thank you. Okay. So just so everybody has an idea of what this means in terms of property taxes, the $4.8 million that's available in property taxes to provide needed services for our community, that would equate to $13.95 if we use that entire amount to provide services. That would equate to $13.95 per $100,000 of assessed valuation, just so you know. Okay? And secondly, in terms of the amendments that are brought forward, the total is, and I could have added wrong, I did it all by hand, but it's about $805,000. And what that equates to in terms of property taxes is about $3.35 per $100,000 of assessed valuation, just so you know the numbers. Okay? Okay. Thank you. Ms. Johnson, you have the floor.
There are two positions in here that are added to the staffing. Were they both calculated fully loaded?
Which positions?
The one was the planning and zoning, the community development, and the other was the homeless coordinator.
Right, and fully loaded means the position salary and benefits. Yes.
Okay. And then the other question I had is, what were your thoughts when you did like the homeless coordinator out of fund balance, and the other one was
Everything else is taxes, property taxes. I think.
And the other was the community development. I can understand the community development one.
Mhm.
And in our current budget, the fund balance, how much did we use? 5.5 million with fund balance?
I've heard from the mayor's mouth that there's $300,000 left in the surplus, if you will, and so that's why I used some of that money for that position.
So that
Am I correct?
Yes, it's, Madam Chair, it's $309 million, or thousands.
Thank you. Ms.
So
Johnson?
but the homeless coordinator, and I just was thinking that's a municipal employee position, and I just was curious why you had that fund balance versus property tax.
Because it's still property taxes, and if there's money left on the table in the surplus, is what I'm calling it, then I wanted to use some of it for public safety. Because I really don't think it matters, but I just figured there's $300 in surplus left, $300,000 in surplus left. Let's use some of it. before we add additional taxes. Anything else, Ms. Johnson?
No, I think that's it.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Steele?
Do we have some time to get another amendment in between now and whenever?
No, it's time's up. Just kidding. No, absolutely we have time.
Yeah,
Today is
because
Friday.
I needed the.
Tuesday.
Some money.
Comes in front of us.
before we did
Right.
that.
No, we have time, and it would really be nice to have all the amendments in hand before the meeting on Tuesday, just so we have a heads up
Yeah.
on what we're going to have in front of us. Mr. Steele,
And the
thank
other thing
you.
is, we'd like the administration to know ahead of time so they can tell us what the position is before it's brought Tuesday. Because sometimes, I was saying some members, including myself, wait the last moment. The administration sits there saying, why didn't you talk to us about it? So I'd much rather have the information from you guys ahead of time.
My logic here, my consideration is the money that Solid Waste Services gave up or was taken by the city. I would like to be able to make a case for that, for adding at least a portion of that back in terms of some investments and plans that they have that they now don't have the cash to deal with that they were doing, and they certainly don't want to go. They don't have any debt at the moment, and they don't want to go into debt over some of these issues. So, and I'm not sure they can go into debt over those issues. But so I will bring something forward. Hopefully, maybe at least.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. And just
Make sure it's sent to Barbara if you will.
right, just so that everybody has a clear understanding, that $5.6 million is a line item that balances the budget. So. And I have to say that I have some concerns too about taking that money from solid waste services, okay? But keep in mind that if we do make adjustments to that, it's going to affect the bottom line because it is part of what's being, the first quarter budget revisions being balanced. So there are several line items. If you look at this document, there are lots of line items, okay, that constitute the bottom number. And the 5.6 is in this document as a revenue source.
It looks like to me.
So it means,
$4 million available.
the point that I'm trying to make, okay, is that these are line items, and the $4.8 million that's available takes in consideration that the solid waste dividend, if you will, is a revenue source that gets us to this number. So my point is, if we make any changes there, we're going to have to make changes somewhere else. But we can have some discussion, further discussion offline on that, okay?
We have a work session this afternoon.
On solid waste, but yeah, you and I can talk some more about that. But I just wanted to make that point so everybody realizes that.
And the other
Ms.
aspect to
Johnson?
remember is that it's how it affects the tax cap. That's part of the discussion too.
Yeah.
Use of Mesa.
Right, and we were talking about, that with regards to the school district and everything.
Right, but again, my point is that the $5.6 million is a revenue line item in this document,
Yes.
okay, which means that the revenues
Sorry,
match
figure it
expenses, and so the tax cap is a side note. Thank you, Mr. Steele. Any other comments? Mr. Peterson?
So, if we use the 5 million from solid waste services, and the balance was 4,875,000, so does that mean we have to come up with some more cash somewhere?
Let me just say this, and Ms. Banzoff, if you want to jump in, that's fine. The reason why we're $4.8 million under the tax cap is because we're using $5.6 million of solid waste services as a revenue source.
Right.
Thank you. Do you want to add to that, Ms. Banzoff? If you want, you don't have to. Thank you.
So if we don't use the 5.6 million, or whatever it is, then we're gonna have to increase the tax cap?
No.
We need.
Ms. Johnson, did you
We're
want to
gonna
make a
have to
comment?
come back to the cap, or?
If we don't use that, if we give them back that $5.6 million, we're going to have to find an expenditure to reduce.
Right.
Okay. You want to make a comment? I'm sorry, I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
No, if I may, Madam
Please.
Chair, in that there is $4.8 million available under the cap. If the solid waste dividends were not taken, that to the extent of the 4.8, the 4.8 can be replacement funding for that, up to 4.8 million of that dividend.
Right.
So,
And then it'll be
so that
over.
is available capacity under the cap. So it would bring the cap up to the limit.
And the point is, there won't be any money, okay, available tax dollars for anybody's amendment if we give that money back. That's the bottom line,
Well,
other than the $300,000 from the surplus.
but what I'm thinking, and what Mr. Steele had mentioned, is they would like to buy some more equipment, and so by taking this $5+ million out of their balance, it kind of handcuffs them from making business decisions that could actually increase their bottom line. So I think we might have to take that into consideration as well.
And I agree with you. You know, I have issue, again, with using solid waste funds to balance general government budget, although it's allowed to provide for services. But we have to have further discussion on how we're going to deal with it. You know, because it's not just a matter of giving it back to them. There's a fact, on the table. Okay, any other comments on this particular issue? Would anybody like to bring forward, or at least for discussion purposes, an additional amendment other than the ones that the three of us have offered? Mr. Steele?
Am I correct in assuming that if we have 4.8 under the cap at this moment, and these amendments add up to, what did we say, 800,000 basically?
Yeah, right.
So we're at $4 million under the cap. I would, you know, I guess I would like to have it all back, because I think that solid waste service can make a good argument for use of those funds. But if we don't, I do want to make sure that I get a few $1 million back. And so that's the magnitude of what I'm considering for an amendment. If we've got some
Right.
other amendments that are going to come up, they're going to come up, and we just
Right.
have to look at it in that context.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. So let me just make this comment for clarity, I hope, okay? With the $4.8 million that's under the cap that we can use for services, okay? The amendments that we have in front of us add up to 800,000, give or take. So that leaves $4 million under cap. So we can virtually give solid waste back $4 million and we'll be even, kind of, sort of.
But taxed at the cap.
Yeah. Ms. Johnston?
And just to remind folks, there is some flexibility probably in the tax cap because of the school district.
Yes,
Right.
good point.
Right.
That's the reason I was
Thank you,
bringing them
Ms.
up.
Johnson.
And the 2.2, don't forget that it's over 2 fiscal years, so it's only 1.1.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. So that's something that, you know, I mean, I hate to think about what's happening with education in our community, but that's a side note.
That's reality.
So anyway, okay, any other comments before we adjourn? Now's your chance. All right. Meeting adjourned.